This is the Ruby on Rails installation screencast for the Ruby on Rails tutorial, specialized for Macintosh OS X and for Linux systems. Since I'll be working exclusively at the command line, the installation instructions should be identical for the two systems. We can start by installing a program called Git, which is a version control system that will allow us to keep track of the changes in our Rails projects as we go through the tutorial. And it's also useful sometimes for installing software, which is why we're installing it right now. We'll use it shortly to install another program. So let's get started with that. I'm feeling lucky. And there's Git. I'm just going to download the tarball here. It's a tar.gz file. I could extract this with the OS X archive utility, but in order to keep this unified with a Linux installation, I'm just going to save the tarball and then unzip it at the command line. By the way, the version might have changed slightly since this release, but don't worry if there are minor version differences. Git will work fine, I'm sure. Oh, you can even see, look at that. Projects using Git, Ruby on Rails. Let me navigate to my downloads directory and then untar it. Tar, it's zipped, so I'm going to do z, x, the file, git, and then tab to get tab completion. So that untarred it, and then I can cd into that directory. And the way to install Git is the usual way to install a Unix program, which is to run the command make. On some systems, you have to do /configure first, but in this case, I can just type make. It takes quite a bit of time to compile Git, so don't worry if it takes a couple minutes on your system. I'm going to skip ahead in the screencast, but it might take a couple minutes. And now that make is done running, we can install Git by typing sudo make install. Sudo here is substitute user do, and it allows us to run a command as a different user, and by default it just runs as the administrative user or root user on the system. And there we go. We can check to see if Git is installed by typing git and then passing it the version flag. And there it is. Again, don't worry if your version isn't exactly the same, but this tells us that Git is installed and it's basically working. At this point, I'm going to make a couple of custom modifications that are definitely optional, but I find them useful when dealing with Git projects. The first is to set up tab completion with Git projects. So I can do that by copying a file. It's in contrib, where is it? So that was a double tab there to show all the stuff here. Contrib completion. And so you can see how I can type com tab to get completion. It's really nice to be able to get that with Git branches as well. And then it's git completion.bash, and I'm going to copy it to my home directory, which is just tilde. And then I'm going to open up my bashrc file. And add a couple lines. And I have a comment that says git tab completion. And then I'm going to source the git completion.bash file. This just runs it whenever my shell starts. Source tilde / git dash completion.bash. The second thing I want to do is configure my prompt to show the branch of the project that I'm working on at any given time. We'll be learning about Git branches in this tutorial. Let's take a look at this. I'm just going to copy this in because it's quite intricate. I'll include a text file with the screencast that in case you want to replicate this. This is a bunch of strange bash arcana. I don't know very much about this. I don't even remember how I ended up setting this up. But I would like to note that the 007 here is an auspicious sign. I'm going to save that, and let's close it down. And now I'm going to source the bashrc file, and dot is an alias for source. It's also the current directory, but in this context, it's the source command. The effects of these changes in the first lesson, based on chapter 1 from the book, that creates a first app, and we'll see it throughout the rest of the tutorial. And it's fine if you want to skip this step, but I find it useful. The next step is to install a program called curl. I'm feeling lucky again. Here we go, curl. Well, you can see what curl is. Curl groks URLs, that's what it is. Curl is a command line tool for transferring data with URL and syntax. So one of the things that curl lets you do is download stuff from the command line and issue general HTTP requests for the command line. It's a really useful program. Let's install it from here. You can click on this, and then we're going to install the tarball again. Probably could have stayed in the downloads directory, but here we go. And we can see what we've got here. So there's our tarball, and we can tar zip. It's zip, so we want to unzip it, extract file, curl. By the way, a lot of people put a V sometimes in here. They'll put a, let me show you what happens if you do that. V is for verbose, and it'll show you all the things that are inside the tarball. That is useful, and I think a lot of people adopt it because they like to see that there's really something going on. But a lot of the time, the bottleneck in the untar step is actually outputting stuff to standard output. So I've gotten in the habit of suppressing the verbose for the most part because oftentimes it's a lot faster. Oops, so let's cd into the directory, and the steps are the same as we did for git, which is make and then sudo make install. Sometimes you can put these on the same step, on the same line. Let's do this, make and sudo make install. The double ampersand there will cause the second command not to be run if the first command fails. This is a nice way to, nice compact way to install software at the command line. And here we go. And at this point, curl should be installed because I did make ampersand ampersand sudo make install. And we can check by typing curl -- version. And there it is. It's the right version number right there. And now we're going to use these two pieces that we've installed so far, git and curl, to install a piece of software called Ruby Version Manager, or RVM. And I'm feeling lucky again. This is my lucky day, I think. And here we go. And one of the cool things about Ruby Version Manager is this awesome art on the front. It's really crazy. So I'd like to thank RVM's author, Wayne E. Seguin, not only for writing RVM, but also for helping me with this section of the tutorial book and hence the screencasts. You can click on the install there, and then now there's this magical incantation. This is pretty fancy, I have to admit. I'm not 100% sure how it works. But this is the line we need to install RVM. You can see that it uses curl, and we'll see in a moment that it uses git as well. So I've copied it to my clipboard. And now I'll paste it in to install the latest version of RVM. It's a good idea to install it from source the way we are now because it changes quite often. And by the way, this section here, this is git. So this is an indication that we need to git to install this. And we can look down here. Let's take a look at some of these things. There's RVM notes here. There's one thing you probably want to do if you've ever installed RVM before. You want to type RVM reload. You might not have to do this, but I probably do because I've installed RVM before. And now I can do RVM notes to see the notes for my system. And it's also worth noting that Wayne hangs out in IRC right here. Here's the web chat line. This is webchat.freenode.net. He's incredibly helpful at with any sort of question about RVM. If you run into any trouble, definitely get in touch with Wayne on IRC. This is just a quick insert. I'd like to thank Stefano Bernardi for catching this error. There's one more thing we have to do if we're installing RVM for the first time. There's a line here, you can see at the RVM installation website, that you have to put in your profile. So this is in the home directory, it's .profile. And you can just add in this line. And then it's probably a good idea not just to source this, but actually to log out. So let's do this, and then restart it. There we are. So at this point, we can run this line here, type RVM pipe head-n1, and it says on this installation page that it should say RVM as a function, and indeed, that's exactly what we just got. Now that we've installed RVM, installing Ruby is really easy. We can type RVM install and then the version of Ruby that we want to install. And in this case, I'm going to be using version 1.9.2 of Ruby for this tutorial screencast series. And now Ruby is done installing and compiling. As I mentioned a couple times before, I'm compressing these steps. This one actually took quite a bit of time on my system, and I'd already extracted the file and downloaded, or the Ruby file and downloaded it. So it'll probably take quite a bit of time for this to install on your system. But now that we're done, actually already ready to install Rails. And the reason for that is that RVM not only installed Ruby, but it also installed Ruby gems. Now, if you install Ruby another way, you might have to install Ruby gems separately. But in this case, RVM did the hard work for us. Ruby gems is a package manager for Ruby software packages, which are called gems. And lots of software in the Ruby world is distributed as gems, including, among others, Rails. Because different applications often have different gem requirements, it's useful to make what's called a gem set using RVM to bundle those gems together in one package. And we can do that by typing take a look at this, RVM -- create. And we want to use this gem set at the same time. And the way you do this is you put the version of Ruby, 1.9.2, and then the @ and then the name of the gem set. Because of the -- create there, this will create a gem set with this name. So Rails 3 tutorial is what I'll call it. Oops, tutorial. And we also want this gem set to be the default gem set. And we can arrange for that to happen by doing RVM -- default. And I'm also going to do use here, even though it's redundant, but it doesn't do any harm. RVM -- default use 1.9.2 at Rails 3 tutorial. And at this point, we're ready to install Rails. The way to install Rails is using the gem command that comes with Ruby gems. This is gem install Rails. Now at this point we could hit return and it will install the latest version of Rails. The way that gem install works is that gem install, the name of a gem, automatically installs the latest version of the gem. And that might seem like it's always what you want, but experience shows that different gems will often become incompatible with each other as the version numbers change. And so in order to eliminate that incompatibility as a source of potential error in this tutorial, I'll always be using specific versions of gems. In this case, we're going to pass a version flag, -- version, at the command line, and then we're going to say 3.0.0. Now, even though Rails 3 is still fairly new, it turns out there's already been an update. Rails 3.0.0 has a security vulnerability that has been fixed in Rails 3.0.1. So let's take a quick look at the blog post that tells us about this. This is the main Ruby on Rails blog at weblog.rubyonrails.org. It's called Writing Rails. And it notes here that there's a problem in something called accepts nested attributes for. Now, we will not use this anywhere in the Ruby on Rails tutorial, but it's better with security issues always to err on the side of caution. And it gives us an opportunity to uninstall a gem and install a new gem. So first I'm going to do gem list Rails, which will tell us all the versions of Rails that are installed. Here, no surprise, this is 3.0.0, which we just installed. And so now I'm going to do gem uninstall Rails. And we do want to remove the executable, although it probably doesn't matter because we're about to install a new one. Now we're going to do gem install Rails. Now remember we did -- version before. There's actually a shortcut for that, just -v 3.0.1. And with that, our application will automatically get the security update that comes with the latest version of Rails. Now we can double check that we've got the right version just by doing Rails -v, which runs the Rails executable and tells us the version number. In this case, Rails 3.0.1. Now, I'd like to mention that the Rails tutorial screencast series uses the Rails 3 release candidate. Now, there were just a couple of minor differences, and they've already been incorporated into this screencast series. So I just wanted to make sure that you're not alarmed when you see a slightly different version number in the rest of the tutorial. All of the source code in the Ruby on Rails tutorial has been checked against Rails 3.0.1. We've got Rails 3.0.1 installed. You're ready to move on to the rest of the tutorial.